community-based organizations that are involved in the fight against gender-based violence and femicide are being invited to apply for funding through the GBVF Response Fund. Now, the fund is a part of a national response to gender-based violence and femicide in South Africa and is aimed at coordinating financial resources in order to support relevant programs and campaigns that will raise awareness, lead to mass action, and also result in behavioral change. So for more information on the fund, its beneficiaries and what to expect, we are joined by its Chief Executive Officer, Lindi Dlamini. Lindi, thanks so much for your time. Welcome to Morning Live.
Indeed, thank you for having me, and thank you to the viewers out there.
So let's start by talking about the GBVF Response Fund and also who qualifies for it.
Indeed. So the GBVF Response Fund, as you pointed out in your opening, is a national response fund that was set up to be action-oriented. It came about as a result of the presidential summit that took place in 2018, where civil society members were speaking out around the scourge and the fact that there is urgent help that needs to be provided. Urgent action needed to be taken. This is a pandemic in our nation. This then culminated in the drafting of the National the National Strategic Plan on GBVF. On the 4th of February this year, the President launched the fund together with the support of a lot of private parties. The fund is private-led and run, and we had the overwhelming support of the International Women's Forum of South Africa chapter, who were instrumental in bringing the fund to life. So the fund really has been brought about to enable the raising of funds and the deployment of funds to help this overburdened and underfunded sector. It's to ensure that community-based organizations are put in a position where they can assist in the response. But it is also to ensure that various programs of action can be taken and implemented to ensure the ultimate eradication sooner rather than later. As you know, the scourge of GBVF has grown at phenomenal proportions, and in particular now, during the COVID pandemic, it has become even more exacerbated. So the purpose of the fund is really to raise funds and to deploy funds to support causes that are in place for the eradication of GBVF and all harmful actions against women, children, marginalized communities, and the LGBTQI sector.
Exactly how much money are we talking about, Lindi, in terms of minimum and maximum allowances that people could apply for?
So in terms of the current cohort that we are calling for proposals for, there's a minimum of 50,000 and 250,000 per annum that we would be providing to those community-based organizations or NPCs or voluntary trusts that apply. There's also a simplified process to ensure that compliance barriers do not then get into the way of a community-based organization receiving assistance. We really want the call to go far and wide to reach community-based organizations operating in rural areas, in urban areas, peri-urban areas, in townships. We want to make sure that we are reaching even organizations which, without our existence and support, would not have help and support and guidance.
And just in terms of how much you've learned from some of the mistakes that others have made in the past with funding initiatives, especially around this COVID period, what is the qualifying criteria? Because often we hear of people complaining about that as a serious barrier to entry. So what are the criteria and how do qualifying organizations actually go about applying?
Sure. So we've made sure that we have the minimum required to demonstrate the fact that an organization actually exists. So the constitution of an organization or founding documents. The second requirement is the fact that the organization must demonstrate that it has been active in this space for at least 12 months. And that's just to make sure that we don't have opportunism as a result of the call for proposals. The third is we require bank statements just to demonstrate the activity in that space. We don't require that the organization be registered with the Department of Social Development. We don't require that the organization be registered as a PBO with SARS. So the requirements are actually very simple. There will be a process that helps and supports potential grant recipients with the application process. And if they want to make inquiries, anybody out there who wants to make inquiries can send an email to info@gbvfresponsefund1.org.za. Alternatively, they can go to the website www.tshikululu.org.za. Tshikululu spelled Tshikulu. That is the partner with whom we will be working to ensure that we receive all applications, we vet them, and then we put them through a process of evaluating against the criteria that the fund has set up.
And then what's the envisioned turnaround time for these applications, Lindi?
So the call for proposal is open until the 6th of August. Within 3 weeks of that, we will have given responses to everybody, and potential grant recipients will then know that they are going forward into a further process. And it is at this point then, if there are certain deficiencies in the application, but the project and the proposal is sound, but perhaps the person needs support and assistance with SARS requirements, we will be providing assistance and support with meeting those requirements and having those submitted. And at that point, we will then handhold the grant recipient through the rest of the application process, right up to the donation agreement. It is a very intense engagement process to ensure that the grant recipient understands what they need to do, the timelines for reporting. There's an accounting process back to the fund to enable us to demonstrate that we have deployed the fund in a manner that is consistent with the objectives of the fund, and we've used funds responsibly, and we've made sure that the funds are being used responsively.
Lindi, what sort of safeguards have you put in place to prevent any fraudulent activity in administering the fund?
I think one of the major safeguards is really this vetting process that goes about corroborating the existence of the organization, corroborating its track record, corroborating its activity through its bank, and then corroborating its tax compliance status. We will also be requiring a number of reports during the period of the grant. We've made sure that those are as simple as possible to submit, but we will need them to be qualitative. They will need to include pictures, for instance. They will need to include data. If it is, for instance, a training, that training must demonstrate how many people have been trained in the particular intervention. If it is the assistance of survivors of GBVF, we would need to know how many people have been assisted at the different times and what the nature of that assistance was. And that is to enable us as a fund to be accountable to our stakeholders, being the donors who have so wonderfully come to the party and given us the funds with which to start this up, to respond urgently to the need that is out there to support those women and children who are experiencing this scourge, and to turn the situation around so that women and children and LGBTQI community do not live in fear as they currently do. Indeed, our constitutional freedom rests on our ability to deploy these funds responsibly to ensure the eradication of the scourge.
And just, on a side note, as it were, have you actually looked at, in terms of the sort of programs that you're hoping people would pitch to you? Because it's one thing to have all of these organizations seeking funding, but how diversified are these responses generally?
They generally are quite diverse. And I think it's important to point out that the civil society participants who actually brought this initiative to life in convening the first presidential summit are the first people with whom the fund met on the 15th of February after the president had launched it. And the significance of that was to check back in to say, now that the fund has been launched, we want to make sure we've properly understood in going about executing our mandate who needs to be reached, who might be left out, what processes do we need to put in place to ensure that the fund is as inclusive as possible and catches as many potential organizations that could be helped as possible. So we had that validation exercise, and we're looking to have it again before we close off. And we've gone so far as to send out media releases on this RFP to a number of community-based organizations. We've sent them in the language of the region, and that really is to make sure far and wide the call is heard, because we have heard how other organizations missed the call because they didn't hear it, missed the call because it resonated only in urban spaces. We want to reach everybody. We want everybody to have the assistance and support of the fund if they are eligible and they are working in this space to make a meaningful difference.
So just in conclusion, Lindi, once again, how do people access the information?
They can access the information by calling 011-544-0300, and that's the call center that we have set up to provide them with information, to answer any questions they may have. They may also send an email to info@GBVF Response Fund 1, the number 1, .org.za. Finally, they may go to the website www.chikululu.org.za. They will get application forms there. They will get some guidance on how best to go about applying. They will also get guidance on the application process that pertains to them, depending on the type of organization and entity they are. So there's an FAQ that really answers all the questions, but they may follow up with an email and a call if they need to do that.
Well, Lindi, thanks so much for your time. Lindi Dlamini is the Chief Executive Officer of the GBVF Fund, and this is, of course, a call for community-based organizations to respond to this call for funding. And as Lindi said, between 50,000 Rand and 250,000 Rand per annum is what is available for community-based organizations who are fighting the scourge of gender-based violence and femicide. If you are in that space, please feel free to go on to any of the avenues that Lindi indicated that you can use to actually access information for that funding. Right.